Hello everyone, it's Shane Kanto, your Wasteland Reviewer, and welcome to the Wasteland, my weekly show where I take a deep dive into a particular film. And we're taking a shifting gears here from the past couple of weeks where, I've been going through all of Martin Scorsese's filmography and took on some of his bigger narrative films like Taxi Driver, most recently just did his concert film The Last Waltz, and now taking a step back and looking at his documentary interview that he did with Stephen Prince, who is a friend of his, and he popped up in the movie Taxi Driver as the arms dealer that's selling Travis Bickle all of his guns. And I always wondered, why have a documentary about this particular actor who, popped up in one Scorsese film? But the thing is, such a fascinating person, and we'll get into that. But this show has 3 parts. We have coming attractions, then we'll talk about our main feature, the documentary American Boy, and then we'll get into some recommendations that I have for all of you. So let's get started with the week of... So Friday, November 12th, we have some films like a Home Alone reboot coming to Disney+, a big heist action film with Dwayne Johnson, Ryan Reynolds, and Gal Gadot coming out on Netflix, Red Notice, which I got a chance to see. A lot of fun. And you have a documentary from Julia Child and Tick Tick Boom, which is a new Netflix film that might be getting some awards consideration. But for me, there could only be one, and it had to be Belfast. And Kenneth Branagh is such a talented director, and this seems like such a passionate, personal film, and this beautiful, striking black and white. But that trailer just roped me in. I personally have, I love Irish culture, and I'm so excited to watch this film. And, I have the song Everlasting Love stuck in my head from the trailer, and just the energy about it, the emotion, the cast looks great, and just everything about it seems magical and wonderful and moving and impressive. And I'm so excited to see this film. I just cannot wait. And this has to be probably on the top of my most anticipated films for at least the month of November. There's just so many movies coming out over the next 2 months because, trying to cram them all in there after the past year and a half. So I'm excited for Belfast, but there's a lot of fun, seems like, coming out this weekend for November 12th. But those are the coming attractions. We're going to shift gears back into our feature, American Boy, which this documentary is Martin Scorsese just hanging out with his friends, interviewing Stephen Prince about some of the crazy stories that he has experienced, his own experiences. And it's interesting because you have Neil Young's Time Fades Away playing over the film. And it's so interesting because, I've talked a lot on this show and in the articles that I've written about how important music is embedded into Scorsese's films, and capturing somebody like Neil Young, who he captured in The Last Waltz during that concert, and using his music to try to, reinforce the messaging of his film makes a lot of sense. You can tell Scorsese was a passionate music fan and is a student of this era of music. And including that in this film is really interesting. And you have Scorsese directing this film. You see him quite a bit in the film because, you have a camera set up. He's sitting there. He's interacting with Stephen Prince and his other friends, along with, interviewing him throughout the film. And obviously this is a very intimate thing, similar to Italian American, which was much more personal, focusing on his own family and his Italian upbringing. This is really personal in having his friend who's been through so much, really putting it out there. And Scorsese trying to capture that in this film. And there's an intimacy here. You have them sitting in a hot tub together and, interacting like male friends will, throwing little barbs at each other and, interacting in that way. And it's interesting seeing Scorsese in such a human way because, he pops up in his own films occasionally as small characters like the disturbing, disgusting human being that he plays in Taxi Driver. But you see him as just like a guy talking with his friend, but capturing it. And this very home video style shoot of this film inside this house, and then intercutting different shots and clips from home videos of Stephen Prince. So really bringing it full circle for Prince, having these clips from his childhood, showing him now where he is, and what he actually talks about is fascinating. He talks about being an addict and having this very raw emotional conversation about, like, this was something that he experienced working with Neil Diamond. All these musicians coming back from The Last Waltz, and like, you have Neil Diamond, who he worked with, trying to help him get sober, but he didn't want it. And, you know, him eventually getting clean. And probably the most impactful and interesting things that happen in this film are two very specific stories that we have all seen before in other films. And one of them was talking about how he tried to save this young woman who was ODing with a giant shot of adrenaline with a marker, making a draw, like X marks the spot on her chest. And it's just like, I'm sitting there watching this film being like, could it be? And yes, this is where Quentin Tarantino got his inspiration for Pulp Fiction. And it makes so much sense. He is a student of film. He probably had seen this interview and be like, you know, that's really cool. And just like includes that into his own movie. And that's so fascinating that something like this to me, something that I really didn't know much about until, you know, I started looking at Scorsese's filmography to do this show, and seeing that, and then it translating into like, this has been something that has influenced great filmmakers. And you have another scene of him having to shoot and kill a man trying to attack him while stealing tires while he worked at a gas station, and Richard Linklater used this in one of his films. And this is so fascinating that this little documentary, this little interview, has such a big impact on films from other directors. And I think that's probably the most fascinating thing, is like, this film, this interview is interviewing a storyteller. And you can definitely tell that Stephen Prince is a storyteller. I've met quite a few storytellers. I'm related to quite a few storytellers. Growing up with my grandfather and my uncle, they were storytellers. And you can tell when Stephen Prince is so comfortable on this camera because he is a storyteller, and he's there to tell these stories so vividly and so passionately, and you're just drawn in. And you can tell, I can tell now why Scorsese wanted to make this film and focus on his friend, because there's just a way about he tells these stories. And like, I'm sitting there wondering, I'm like, are these like tall tales? You never know. But the thing is, this is so fascinating, and Stephen Prince is so convincing. You're just like drawn in to this film. And I'm really glad that, you know, I included this in my series on Scorsese, and that this was available on Criterion Channel, because there was a couple of his early documentaries I couldn't find. So I had to cut them from my show schedule. But this one, they had it on Criterion Channel, so I was able to watch it along with Italian American, was also on Criterion Channel. And being able to see this really gave me a lot of perspective, and this was such an interesting experience watching this film. And if you're a cinephile, this is something special to check out. And even if you're not, even just you enjoy a good story, watching this man tell these very vivid and difficult and challenging stories is so fascinating, and you can see why this made such an impact on other filmmakers. And, you know, it just keeps amazing me as I'm going through Scorsese's filmography to see just how big of an impact that he made, and the variety and the range that he provides in his filmography. This is something interesting and special that he was able to do. So if you get a chance, go watch American Boy, this interview documentary on Criterion Channel right now. But next week, I'm going to be getting into a doozy. So we're going to be getting into Raging Bull, and I should be having my friend Vinny on, and this will be dropping actually on my birthday, on November 19th, turning 30. Oh my. But that's American Boy, and now let's shift gears into doing some recommendations. So I do actually, for the first time in a while, have one of my films that I wanted to give a shout out to that I watched recently, a new theatrical release, and something on VOD. I don't have anything from my watch list. I haven't touched my watch list in a while. So many screeners, so little time. But I really wanted to do a shout out to Leica and ParaNorman. This stop motion animated film is so perfect for Halloween, and seeing this little boy who sees ghosts and making these connections and being able to use that, it's like kids' version Sixth Sense, except you have this draped in this historical context, just this look, this New England look, this ghost story from the past about a young witch and this cursed town. And this is gets so emotional and impactful, and such a great cast of characters, great vocal performances. The whole entire cast is fantastic, and just the design and the look of everything is off the charts, and there's just a love for film as a part of it. And that's why I think ParaNorman is so special, and Leica is just full of hits. So if you haven't checked out their films like Coraline and ParaNorman, Kubo and the Two Strings, you have Box Trolls, which isn't their best, but I still really enjoy it. And you have Missing Link, which I don't think gets enough love, except, at the Golden Globes when it won Best Animated Feature. Then I got to see Eternals. I had to talk about a Marvel movie, right? So I saw Eternals, and I don't think this is by means any way a bad movie. So, I know it's quote-unquote rotten right now. It's the first ever rotten critical review of a Marvel film in the MCU. It's a bold, ambitious, and so intriguing and deep and morally gray film that, it does have a lot of, the Marvel formula narratively, but it challenges you on a lot of different levels. And I think that's interesting. I never once sat through a Marvel movie and felt this much gray area and having so many great characters a part of it, which is really interesting and engaging and intriguing. And it felt something fresh. And obviously it has its flaws, but I think it's a special kind of film and definitely worth checking out in a theater. And then the last film that I want to throw out here on VOD right now is Mark, Mary, plus some other people. And this is a really, really funny film from Hannah Marks, and starring our two leads here, Haley Law and I think it's Eric Rosenfield. And these two have such great chemistry. They're hilarious. They go into an ethical, non-monogamous relationship, and it's not going to go well. That's the thing. You kind of know where this film's going. It does have some ambiguity, little La La Land-ish towards the end in terms of this romance, but it's so funny. It's so engaging. These characters are so interesting, and you get connected pretty quickly. And, it does challenge you in terms of, how long you'll stick with the two leads and how much you still really like them as this film goes on. But I just had such a fun time. I laughed. The music's great. And, the chemistry between the whole cast is off the charts. This was definitely something worth checking out. A little gem that you can find on streaming. And 100%, this is definitely getting on my buried treasure for Sif Pop for the month of November. Unless everything else blows me out of the water, and then this can't make my top 5. But I'm feeling like it might. But that's another week in the books here on Welcome to the Wasteland, flying solo again. So this show is a little bit shorter. But, check out American Boy, all of my other recommendations, and hopefully we could all go enjoy Belfast, and it's as great as I hope it is. And tune in next week for when I take a deep dive into Raging Bull with my pal Vinny. But thank you as always for tuning in and supporting your Wasteland Reviewer.